Today's session will be about something that most people are interested in, which is form, three-dimensional form, and how to create the illusion of this three-dimensional form on canvas. And to demonstrate this technique, I'm going to use a work of a Hungarian painter. His name was Gyula Benczur. He lived in the past century between 1844 and 1920, and he was a master artist, as you can see from the selected work I'm showing on the screen. And he was especially a master of creating this dimensional sense, the dimensional form on canvas. So before I start, if you feel like that you get any value of my video or other videos, make sure to subscribe. And also, if you think that there is anyone who could make use of it, feel free to share it. So let's get started. To sketch today's painting, even though this is a little bit more complex subject than the usual landscape or still life that I do, I still use a simple grid. And what I did, I divided up the canvas into the same size of grid as I did on my screen, my reference photo. And that makes it a lot easier to create a drawing more quickly if you are not experienced in a certain subject. Like, for example, this is a horse. If you're not really familiar with the anatomy of a horse or even a person, then you can use the grid method to recreate the drawing or the sketch of your painting before you start, and that will save you a lot of time and frustration. Also, the grid is useful to practice drawing and to get yourself a little bit more comfortable with the more complex subjects. So I will continue sketching here, and you will see me doing it on the screen. And if you'd like to practice the same subject or the same painting, then you are welcome to copy what I do. As usual, I will start with blocking in my darkest darks. And the darkest darks obviously are in the eye area, neck, and in a background down below. So I will work on that first, and then I will block in the other larger areas. So for my darkest dark, I will use a mixture of orange. I'm trying to create a warm mixture, and black. So the reason I chose orange and black, because I want to keep my darks relatively warm. And by putting the orange first and then adding the black, I can easier control my value, how dark my mixture is. And I'm just gonna put a little bit of a dab here, and I'm pretty happy with this. I will add just a hair more red in here to further warm it up and add a little more depth to my colors. And next I will block in. Just have to clean my brush. As you already probably know, this is just a partial image, a part of the full painting, only to demonstrate space and dimension on a two-dimensional surface, which is our canvas. One of the key elements to create space on a canvas is how the foreground elements relate to the background elements and how they interact. Notice that I didn't just reach for plain black to create my darkest dark. I rather try to mix my darkest colors together to create a lot richer. I didn't mention it at the beginning because I start pretty much every one of my videos with this. My canvas is toned, so it was a white canvas, and I created a light wash on top of it with solvent and a little bit of paint. Any neutral paint color would do the work if you wanted to tone your canvas. However, the #1 goal by using a tone canvas is to have an easier time figuring out the values. My next step is the lighter shadows. I will block them in, and the way I will decide whether it's dark enough or not is what I just did, placing it against some of the darks. And I already know just by doing so that no, they're not dark enough. So I will have to adjust that. So the next one is a crucial step in creating form, and that is the shadows. So what I have here so far is my darkest darks and lightest lights. Now I will work on some of the shadows. And I start with this warm mixture by adding some orange to it and a little bit more of the dark ones. So this was cadmium orange, ultramarine blue, and I had the same mixture with a little bit of white as well. That's the lighter one. And I'm mixing the two together. And I need more orange. To really bring that warmth through. Now I will test it again against my darks. And it's better but it's not quite there yet. I need to make it darker. I will use more of the blue, but whenever I put the blue in there, I need to compensate with a warm color, because blue is cool and it cools the mixture. So this mixture should be close enough, and I will try right here. And yes, I'm pretty happy with that one, at least for the time being. All right. Some parts of this shadow might get a little darker, especially closer to the edges. So I will add some dark there to further create the sense of form. And I will keep going, filling in all the spaces where I see darker shadows. As you can see, it's not only crucial to get the values right, but also the right value relations, meaning have to pay attention to what are the neighboring values. So we are looking at this two different ways. One, we have an object, or actual subject, a horse, in the foreground, and it has its own form and all its own muscle masses. That's one where we're going to create this feeling of dimension, but also how this horse relates to the background, what value contrasts and what kind of edges we have also determines how convincible the depth on the canvas is going to be. So for example, here I have hard edges, dark hard edges against light hard edges. On the back of the horse, it's a little bit softer, but still contrasting values. This area, because these are hard edges and contrasting values, will draw more attention than this area where, even though there are contrasting values or up here, but not as hard edges, not as sharp. So this is all part of creating the feeling of dimension and space. And these are just small, subtle value changes within the larger areas. As you could see, I try to block in larger areas first and then work on smaller ones. And now going back down here to create the form. There are still plenty of shadow spaces here, shadow areas that I need to complete. And I try to keep them relatively warm and colorful. rich, colorful shadows are always more convincing than just plain gray ones. Also, following the form with the strokes is a good idea. By following the form, you can also create the sense of mass. It's kind of like sculpting. And the final step in creating form is adding halftones. So halftones are the shift between shadows and lights. Right now you see that there's a very abrupt line between the shadow area and the light area. And to create a halftone, a transition between this light and shadow, there are two ways to do that. One is gently blending with a brush the transition between the two. The other technique or way to do it is to actually mix a correct value that's in between the dark and the light, and just place it against it. And there's usually also a shift in temperature and a shift in color. So we need to pay attention to all of them. And there is a little bit more cool temperature on the actual painting in this shift, so I'm adding a little bit more blue to this area. And after this step, once I went through the whole horse and created these halftones, there are two steps basically after that. One is to adjust all the values, because not everything is exactly what it should be. And the other one is, the final one is adding the detail. But that's really just kind of like icing on the cake. Not so much, it doesn't have any special effect. At least usually it's not. The least important part in painting, I would say, is the detail. So here you can clearly see how we create form, or the illusion of muscle mass in this instance with a horse. What I did is after I just had the darks and lights, I created halftones. So there was those in-between parts between the light and shadow. And the way to create this illusion is by creating soft transitions. So these are hard edges, and we need to soften these transitions in order to give it a sense of roundness. And same thing down here, I have a very hard edge, and I will soften this hard edge to have this form or the feeling of three-dimensional form. So what I need to do is come up with a value that goes in between these two. And the color temperature is still on the warm side. It has a little bit more orange in it. So I'm trying to pay attention to my directions of strokes, because as I mentioned it earlier, that also helps to suggest form. And of course, texture. So you can see these are rather small areas that we need to work out, but very crucial. You can clearly see the difference, what happens when we don't have any kind of transition between our darks and lights. Basically what happens, everything remains flat. It seems to be flat. And as soon as, oops, that's the wrong value. So as soon as we create this shift between values, that's when we start to have form. And this is what Gyula Benczur, one of the things, what he was a master of, creating dimensional forms. So these are the final steps of this painting when I go through, double check all the forms, all the values, and I make final touch-ups before I call it a completed painting. And sometimes when I work with really light colors like this white horse, after a few days when the paint starts to dry a little bit and gets a little bit tacky, then I often go back and go over some of my lightest lights, only because they tend to get a little bit darker as they dry. And it's a lot easier to apply those brighter colors when it starts to get a little drier, the surface. So I'm still noticing a few areas that need some highlight. And I also notice some areas like down here in the shadows where it needs a little bit of lighter tones, lighter values. And of course, it often happens that, especially with more complex paintings, that I set it aside for a few weeks, sometimes even a month, and look at it with a fresh eye after a while. And then I notice things that I wouldn't, or I didn't notice while I was working on it. So if you have the opportunity to set some of your paintings aside and just don't even look at them for a little while and then take them out again, usually you discover things you just missed when you were painting it. If you feel like you're getting value out of my videos, make sure to subscribe. I regularly post similar content, and all of them are about helping you to improve your work and find out about tips and tricks and ideas behind painting and how to approach certain topics. And feel free to share it with anyone you think it might help. See you next time.